Now, tomorrow we'll be able to say we are still here, but he's gone. Yeah.
That's still our favorite song, #1 with a bullet, here on First Nation Fridays. Welcome, everybody, to Stir Crazy. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Welcome to episode number 60. Of course, that video that you just saw was from a couple of weeks ago, back in early June, shot by journalist Max Nastarak from the Minnesota Reformer. But damn, turn that up. Play that one again, baby, because that is our favorite jam around here on First Nation Fridays. As we look around the country and we're seeing these symbols of colonialism and genocide and these traitorous, murderous individuals who have statues erected in their honor, they are coming down nationwide. And it is a wonderful, wonderful sight to see. But we also know it is just the beginning. Listen, gang, we have a full slate of stories to discuss. Everything that is relevant to our panel that is happening all across Indian country. And reminder, we all live in Indian country. We are on somebody else's land, occupied land. So issues that affect the Native American community are things that need to be of interest and of concern to all of us, to everyone that's watching here. So listen, we want to hear you in the comments and in the chat. Shout out to everyone that's on Periscope, watching us on Twitter. Bienvenidos. Thank y'all for being here. And time to introduce our fantastic panel today. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is journalist and activist Jen Deerinwater. On the line from California, I believe Desiree Kane is joining us, and Johnnie Jae, all the way from California. Do I have everybody's location correct? Let me just double check that. I should have double checked that before we went on live. Ladies, welcome. Thank you guys for being here again for First Nation Fridays.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. I'm like, I can't hear anyone. Okay. So, we just saw that video from a couple of weeks ago in Minnesota, out at the state capitol. But these Columbus statues and other statues of the deplorables are coming down as well. In Denver, Colorado, I think this was last night, big Columbus statue fell there. And we also know about the actions that have been happening here in Washington, D.C., when it was last Friday that protesters brought down the statue of Confederate General Victor Pike. Today, Donald Trump ordered that statue be put back up because he's a dick. But also, ladies, a shared enemy of both Native Americans and Black Americans was Andrew Jackson, the president, whose statue was attempted to be taken down. But that is when police, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, really brought the hammer down on local protesters who were trying to bring that statue down. Of course, Donald Trump is trying to pass or sign like an executive order that would mandate jail time for people who so-called attack and vandalize federal statues. We discussed this last week, but this is still very much an ongoing thing with these symbols of genocide, murder, racism falling around the country. I wanted to ask, what is your take on what the next steps are, and is there a compromise, something to be done with these statues? I've heard people say that we should take them down and put them in museums. People want to preserve maybe the craft work of what went into some of these 100+ year statues. But what should be done with these statues in addition to them coming down? Let's start with Jen.
For me, there's no compromise. They have to come down. That's just the end of it. There's no reason for them to be up other than to glorify Native genocide, the enslavement of Black people, theft of land, and so on. I think it's an interesting idea to maybe keep the statues and have them in museums of sorts. I think I would be okay with that, but only if it was being used in a truthful context. Like it was actually talking about who this person was that this statue is for. We'll say Columbus, for example. Like they need to say who Columbus really was, what he really did, and why the statue came down and what the story is behind that statue coming down. I think it's important to preserve history, particularly around movements and, struggles for justice. But I mean, to just take these statues down and put them somewhere where they're still glorified I wouldn't be okay with that.
Desiree, people are saying it is heritage, not hate. That's like my favorite refrain from races. It's heritage, not hate, talking about Confederate statues in addition to the Confederate flag. But if your heritage is hate, should that shouldn't be on display for idolatry reasons, right?
If people want to have that in their own space, great. I don't necessarily want my tax dollars going to public museums to venerate white supremacy, the same as I don't want the statues up. So the next step would be that we have a public dialogue about Columbus, about colonization, about capitalism, and we start to have a public education moment about what's wrong with these statues, because I think the American education system is a failure and has, fed people this weird narrative for such a long time that there is a veil that's being lifted off of people's eyes, ideologically and politically. So I know the next step in Denver is the Kit Carson statue. The city is taking it down literally right now, literally now. Which is really good. Kit Carson led the long walk, which was difficult and awful. There's no reason for that guy to have a statue. So I think there's probably going to be a couple more things that come down around Colorado and around the United States because people are just over it. And these are good conversations to have if we want to talk about working together and what a shared future on this continent can look like.
Johnnie, I'm thinking about the pictures we saw coming out of the Southwest. This was a week or so ago where protesters were gathered around the statues of Spanish conquistadors. I want to say this was Albuquerque, and I apologize for not having the specific location, but I think a lot of people know what I'm talking about because the story did make national news, where a right-wing armed militia showed up in defense of this statue of these Spanish so-called conquerors and actually shot at protesters. A person was critically injured, and we've seen pictures. I'm thinking of Philadelphia, South Philly, where Italian Americans were surrounding the statue of Christopher Columbus, wielding baseball bats and threatening violence to people who were even contemplating taking the statue down. I mean, we're seeing, white supremacy never goes down without a fight, and they are standing up and defending in some places violently with arms for these statues to remain standing. How do people combat that in this moment?
That's a hard question because, a lot of the people that were there in Albuquerque, from all accounts that I've seen, they were there, they were going to bring it down. And this armed militia showed up, and it's so just beyond me that so many people will put so much value and want to protect such an inanimate object over actual human life. And even when that shot was fired, it made it very clear that, human life is not what matters to these people. It's the idolatry. It's the white supremacy. It's the whitewashed revisionist history that they're trying to protect. it's this idea of American exceptionalism that they're fighting for. It's not human life. It's not justice. It's not even heritage or wanting to hold on to something that means something to them. And, my partner and I were having this conversation, a debate this morning about the statues, because I'm like, they need to come down. There's no reason for them. And to me, it's almost like, it seems like a very childish practice to try and, create these statues to idolize people, to memorialize them, and not really tell the true history of who that person was. And, my partner on the other hand is like, but the irony of this is the fact that these statues are coming down and they're starting the conversation about the real history behind these statues, like who this person was, what they did. And he said, even when tourists go into towns, they're looking at these statues and they see a plaque and they're like, oh, I didn't know this happened here, or I didn't know who this person was. And he's like, well, why can't we, maybe keep the statues, but on the plaques, tell the true history. And he said, and not only just, maybe commission more statues of people, of the people that they hurt, of, the natives or, other historical figures that were on the other side of this, and, try to give people a whole idea of this. And I'm just like, no, I was like, that's what museums are for. That's what history is for. I said, taking down these statues, it doesn't eliminate history. It doesn't rewrite history at all. And it changes the way that we start thinking about history. And it will absolutely change the way that we start thinking about how we teach history and how we need to add more nuance to these conversations so that we're not glorifying violence, that we're not glorifying colonialism, that we're not glorifying these men who did horrible things, who committed crimes against humanity. And, my partner's on like, but on the other hand, we could still learn. He goes, people go. And so we were having this argument this morning. And, I was just looking at him like, oh, poor thing has to learn history from a statue. And we kind of laughed about it. But, for me, these statues need to come down. And like, Jen said, there's no compromise on this. You could put them in a museum, but you absolutely have to tell the truth about who these people are. It's a different time right now because, for Black and Native communities, we get to be honest now. Like, we have our own historians, we have our own storytellers, we have our own people who are reclaiming our narratives and are willing to challenge these whitewashed versions of history. And, it's our time right now. And it's necessary because this is how we move forward. It's so that we stop clinging to these ideas of American exceptionalism and we get down to the nitty gritty of what America is and has been and start talking about what we could be going forward.
A comment from the comments, ladies. One little Indian says, I got a wallet full of faces of genocidal maniacs. Yes, dear, we all do.
Yep.
Yes.
Jenny, I'm sorry, it was Johnny, what you just said about glorifying the colonizers, what just popped into my head, the fact that whatever the name of Disney streaming service is, I don't even know what it is, but they are going to premiere the live action version of Hamilton, the very successful Broadway musical written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, Puerto Rican American, New York City fellow. And I never saw Hamilton because I could never get past the premise. Every time I would ask someone who was a big fan of this musical, I'm like, but the musical is about Black and brown people assuming the roles of the slave owners. Do I have this correct? And it seems from my outside perspective, again, I have not seen the musical, but it seems to be a sanitization, I should say, of the founding fathers. And these were just misunderstood guys. And maybe if we have a Black guy singing the role of Alexander Hamilton, perhaps it will change the way that we view them. But we know that these were all deeply racist individuals, with few exceptions, some of whom owned slaves, all of whom were fine with the removal and genocide of Native Americans and violating numerous treaties with Native American nations. It's so disappointing to see the glorification of the colonizers in this way, executed by a brown person. And, let me just maybe get y'all's take on that, because, the founding fathers were not good to y'all's people or my people for that matter. So I don't hold them in any sort of reverence whatsoever. What is your take about productions like Hamilton, or just the whitewashing of American history in general, even when it's done by non-white people?
Well, I'm really into indigenous futurism. And indigenous futurisms, like Afrofuturism, is all about reimagining our history and imagining our futures. And so a lot of this, people will look at it and be like, well, we're reimagining, our history and putting ourselves in the role of oppressors, and how maybe things would be different, or how maybe it wasn't that bad, or we were misunderstood, or how, we could lead up to becoming these people. And I think it's so detrimental, because in a lot of ways it's to assuage white guilt. It's to make it seem like, well, anybody could have done this. It didn't have to be white people. If it wasn't white people, it could have been natives doing slavery. It could have been Black people doing slavery. It could have been other people engaging in this. We just happened to get here first. And that's usually the way that it's kind of portrayed. There's a couple of movies that are going to be coming out in the next couple of years that absolutely do this. It's going to be putting Black people in the role of slave owners, and kind of, I don't know. It's just so weird to me, because in a way it's almost kind of feeding the idea that, as we're fighting for justice, as we're fighting for change and equality, that there's this fear from a lot of white people that it's not about justice. It's about us gaining the power to oppress them the way that they've oppressed us. Mm-hmm. And so when I see these adaptations and these stories that are putting marginalized people in the role of colonizers or as oppressors, it really kind of worries me a little bit, because it kind of feeds that fear further, and it kind of validates it in a lot of ways, especially when it's coming from us. Now, I do a lot of indigenous futurism work, and, a lot of our work, it's always about reimagining our futures, and how we're going to survive in different places, what is going to change about who we are as Native people, and what's going to remain the same. And even when you go back and you're trying to reimagine, like, what would Natives be like in a world without colonization? If settlers didn't come to America, how would we have been able to evolve? And it's, when I look at those stories, they're never about us taking the power of the oppressor. It's always about how we organically grew, how we organically followed this line where we got to be who we were meant to be, without our cultures, without our languages, without our traditions, and even our values being disrupted by colonization. And even when you go into the future, we're always evolving. Native people were never stagnant. We were always evolving, always innovating. We were always scientists, always doctors, and innovators. And, when you look at the stories that look at our futures, it's never about colonizing, which is a whole theme around mainstream sci-fi. It's always about going to another place and taking over and having to destroy what was already there in order for us to survive there. And with indigenous sci-fi and even Afrofuturism, that's not the case. We're always looking about how we could coexist in these worlds and how we can adapt. And, how do we keep balance with the worlds that we're coming into contact with in the people? And so, when I see these adaptations, it's very disappointing to me, because, it's not our goal to obtain power, to oppress people, or to exact revenge. We want equality and justice for everybody, not just us. And, Desiree mentioned, we're a very diverse society now. There are so many different people here from so many different backgrounds, and we need to learn how to exist together now, and to imagine how we can exist and how we can grow into this idea of equality and justice for all that, was what they imagined for America in the beginning, even though they failed horribly. But, that was the dream, that this would be a nation of life, liberty, and justice. And, we need to start working on that. And the only way that we can do that is if we start working together to imagine those futures, and to not get caught up on who's wanting power and trying to portray it as, oh, they only want this for revenge. we need to really start talking about, we want this change for the good of all of us, not just one people or not just us, but for everybody.
Desiree or Jen, did you guys want to hop in?
Yeah, I'll join in on this one. So I haven't seen Hamilton. I still don't entirely understand what it's supposed to be. So I got the sort of premise of it was like, it's about the American government. No thanks, I'll pass. So I can't really speak to the play, and I'm not familiar with Indigenous futurism like Johnnie is. I'll say though, what comes to mind when I think about something like Hamilton, it brings up a lot of what I saw working within the government. I ran electoral and issue-based campaigns for a long time. I was pretty entrenched in the Democratic Party and such in Massachusetts. And so I watched a lot of this. I always thought, well, I want America gone. It doesn't have a right to exist. But I guess if we can just get good people into office, things can be better. But a lot of what I saw was, instead of trying to take the system down, it was sort of this strange equation of, well, racial justice means, BIPOC people get to come in and behave the way white people do. Or feminism means, women, i.e. white, straight, cis, able-bodied women getting what the white man has, and so that for me it really puts me off. Like I'm not about having what my oppressor has. I'm not about living like my oppressor. I want that gone. I want us to live in a just society. I want us to live in a world where everyone is valued and has everything that they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. And to me, that doesn't mean me sitting on the board of a Fortune 500 company. It doesn't mean having, a Native person as president for the U.S., because I want the system gone. I don't want to just merely replace it with, marginalized and oppressed people.
Desiree, I'll let you get the last comment before we move on.
Yeah, the system really has a way of just, I think erasing folks or pitting people against one another, or just a number of things that aren't positive community builders, And so when I think about media that's reinforcing the capitalist colonialist paradigm, I'm in the same bucket as Jen, where I just am extremely adverse. I mean, like, I don't go see Superman movies because it's like just going to be the same. If you start to look at what the storylines are that we're repetitively fed, you start to recognize, like, I don't want propaganda in my life, so I stay away from it. Just more of a news consumer, I suppose.
Makes perfect sense to me. Ladies, I wanted to move on because this was a piece that I found that was actually just published today in the food advocacy blog. It's called Civil Eats, and it's about the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. I hope I said that correctly, in Massachusetts, where they are facing de-establishment from the federal government. So their chairman received a call from the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. His name is Daryl LeConte. And throughout the course of their conversation in late March, what LeConte called to tell the chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and his name is Cedric Cromwell, was that effective immediately, the Department of the Interior was moving to de-establishing the Mashpee Wampanoag Reservation. And that means that the tribe could, this is a pretty outstanding, that the tribe would continue to hold on to their land, but they would have to pay steep back taxes on it. They would also no longer be able to operate as a sovereign nation and would suddenly be unable to operate their own police or judicial system. I mean, this was just a stunning announcement from the Trump administration regarding this sovereign nation, this tribe in Massachusetts. And the tribe made a video in response to it. It's about 3 minutes long, but it's a very good watch. Take a look at it.
Most school kids learn about government in the context of city, county, state, and federal. And of course, tribal governments are not part of that at all. What do you think tribal sovereignty means in the 21st century? And how do we resolve conflicts between tribes and the federal and state governments?
Yeah. Tribal sovereignty means that. It's sovereign. I mean, you've been given sovereignty and you're viewed as a sovereign entity.
Our ancestors have been fighting for a long time. We've achieved sovereignty and the ability to self-govern at various periods throughout our history. As we are here at the 400th anniversary of the landing of Mayflower and Plymouth Colony, and America celebrates, our land is being taken from us. And we're being stripped of the right to self-govern yet again.
That history of dispossession was also accompanied by a history of forced assimilation. And the justifications for that is that you're not as good as us. Our systems are better. Our modes of education, our ways of owning land, our ways of working have been continually cited to Indians as the reason for these government policies.
Your ability to have a say in how you educate your children, how you police your people, your family court laws, your tribal laws, all of that is rooted in sovereignty.
You're standing on sovereign land, a reservation. We have our own tribal court. We are self-sufficient in that respect. And that's due to the fact that we're, for one, federally recognized. And now, as of 2015, we are granted that trust status.
Following a series of treaties and laws over many decades, some well-intentioned, some not, the federal government decided to hold Indian land, quote, in trust, in order to prevent non-Indians from ever buying that land. But other than Indians, the only people who have things held in trust for them are children and the mentally incompetent.
This land that is held in trust by the DOI is referred to as reservation land because only the federal government has any say over that land, whereas the state and local authorities do not. In order to receive land in trust, a tribe must prove they are Indian.
This is what I mean about the reservation as a racially constructed jurisdictional environment, that it exists to perpetuate the sovereignty, the conquest, the war against indigenous peoples.
The federal government sent a clear message that they are the ones in power and they can do what they want. But it took so long to get federal recognition, and we thought that it was going to afford us protections, and yet again it's not.
We have a right to hold less than 0.5% of our original territory. That's what we're talking about. We are the sole surviving of 9 tribes that signed a land title for Plymouth Colony to form, which ultimately became the United States of America. So it's ironic that we would be here with hat in hand, begging to have control over our own territory.
We're simple people. We're just asking for a simple request, and that is that the land be put into trust so that they can become a self-sustainable nation, which they have a right to be.
Your land is everything. You don't have a place to live. Families don't come together, so you don't have community. Your land is everything.
Now, the Mashpee, in response to this action by the Department of Interior, filed an emergency restraining order. And back on June 5th, a court, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, reversed the Interior decision, saying that they did not have the legal basis to do this to the Mashpee, and that the Department DOI itself did not follow its own guidelines. But what is so stunning about this is that this is the first time that the federal government since the 1960s has attempted to de-establish a federally recognized tribe as a sovereign nation. And the fact that the Trump administration felt as though they could get away with this was stunning. But even made more stunning is that the Mashpee are the people who welcomed the Pilgrims when they came off the goddamn Mayflower. The reason probably why America even exists was based on the kindness and generosity of this tribe, which has managed to remain on its ancestral home in Massachusetts, which is remarkable, as many other tribes were forcibly removed. Jen Deerinwater, I know you said you have some experience in this part of the country. What were your thoughts when you heard about this case and what the Trump administration was trying to do to the Mashpee people?
It's not surprising. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised. So, as I've been catching up on what's happening with this case, I was reading about how, there's no legal precedent for Trump to do this. But I think we need to remember that when he took office, he said that he wanted his presidency to emulate that of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson had the Indian removals happen, even though it broke Supreme Court case law. So legality has never stopped the United States federal government from harming Native people. It happens all the time, and it happens under all administrations, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. So I guess I'm not surprised by it. And I feel like I keep saying this word a lot lately, but it's just the caucasity, the caucasity to come to Native people and say that we have to beg for our lands, that we can't control our lands, and that then we're going to be taxed for our lands. That's just some white nonsense. It just, to me, feels like this is just all the creation of whiteness and settler colonialism on these lands. And, in terms of the trust piece of this, the trust piece, it feels very white saviorism to me. I feel sometimes like the people that I'm most at odds with as a Native are not the GOP, not that I have any love for them, but for me, it's quite often those, so-called well-meaning white liberals. They're often the ones that I get the angriest with. And so kind of like how that video says that the only people that have trust are outside of Native land are children and those who have mental illness, but you actually can have all kinds of different disabilities and get a trust. So it's not just, being, quote, mentally incompetent, but it really speaks volumes to what white people think of when they look at natives. And I think probably non-native folks of color as well, to some extent. There's this idea of, our poor little downtrodden Native Americans, they just can't take care of themselves. They can't manage their lands. Look at what they're doing. They're all alcoholics. And it's like, well, by no means am I saying everything was perfect before the white invasion. We had issues. Things weren't perfect. Nothing is ever going to be perfect for anyone in this world. But we were taking care of ourselves just fine. All of the problems that we have now are a direct result of settler colonialism and white supremacy, and this for me is just another example of the government just picking and choosing when they want us to be sovereign. We're sovereign when it comes to getting roads on our lands and getting clean water and, internet and things. We're sovereign, so now that's our responsibility. But the government doesn't want to let us keep our lands. And I don't know. For me, it's just the same nonsense, different day, different issue, but it always comes around to the same root cause.
I mean, Desiree, when I read the story, I was horrified. And like Jen, I guess I wasn't surprised because, the federal government has been fucking with Native people for 600 years now, 500 years longer. But it's so galling, the audacity to come and try to take land that people have been on for hundreds of years, thousands of years, that these people have remained on this land, even through colonialism and wars and forcible removal. And then to try to say that they owe back taxes. I mean, yes, Jen, the caucasity, the caucasity of it all. But, ladies, we've had this conversation before where, it's trying to tap more into the news cycle in and around Indian country. What I'm discovering is Indians stay in court. They're always in court suing the government over sovereignty and violated treaties and agreements. So what's your take on this latest violation?
I'm not surprised because this is the same president that, signed in the Dakota Access Pipeline, immediately. He does not care about Native people. But, the government, the U.S. government, a lot of the legal foundations of how land displacement happens with Native people is in this document. It's a papal bull called the Doctrine of Discovery, which basically states that if someone is savage, that they haven't accepted Christ, that they are you have the freedom to kill them without it being part of your broader, you're not committing a sin because they haven't accepted the Lord. And so that document was used to colonize many continents, including North America, but also Australia. I mean, just everywhere. It's one of the root foundational documents that is upholding all of the things in the United States. Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently cited the Doctrine of Discovery in a dispute. So it's been going on since forever, hundreds of years. But I think I look at it a little bit differently in that I just see Native people as we outlive dynasties time and time again that try to conquer this continent. And so we're watching this one, and we will outlive Trump too. We'll outlive the United States too, just like we outlived the Spanish who came before them. And, we're going to be fine in the long run. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to suffer. And I think that's where I start to be concerned, is I want reduction in suffering as this transition occurs. The United States is bursting at the seams. Capitalism is a failure. It's bursting at the seams. So we can really only offer hospice to people as these systems fail, or completely divest and reinvest ourselves as a community and as people on this continent, both indigenous and not, into building the systems and building the lifeways that are going to get us past the end of this dynasty. Right. So I just look at him it's always been that way. Trump he's not special. That's the thing. He's not special, painfully not special,
Johnnie, at the beginning of that video piece that the MASH people put together, was a Q&A with then President George W. Bush. And, Trump is so awful, Bush seems reasonable by comparison, but we all know, what sort of savage genocidal monster Bush is in his own right. But nonetheless, at least in that particular moment, he was able to give a cohesive answer as to what sovereignty is and what it means, it should mean for Native American nations. And yet still in 2020, the U.S. government is still taking Native American, or at least attempting to take Native American lands and making them fight for it legally.
Yeah, it's a continuation, like Desiree was saying. It's not new. I do a lot of lecturing about what I call the pattern of anti-indigeneity, which is segregation, expulsion, elimination, integration, and assimilation. There's five methods that they use to try and eradicate indigenous people on this land. And, every generation, what they end up doing is picking one, it almost seems like. And they'll try and recycle, okay, well, what can we do where we can try to maybe assimilate Native Americans into American society? What can we do to further displace Native people? What can we do to further eradicate a Native people? And you look at different injustices, and this, like with the land grab, is expulsion. And it's not new. And it's something that is not just happening to the Mashpee right now. The MHA Nation, which is the Mandan, Hidatsa, and the Arikara, are also fighting a land grab that is very recent. And, it's over a riverbed, which they've already paid, I believe it's something like $1 billion in taxes on this land that the government is now trying to say that they have no right to. It was the same with the Mashpee. And a lot of that was also a personal beef with Trump because, he's always questioned and tried to fight against their right to have a casino on their own land. And so when, this suit came up, when, he was trying to deestablish them, it was a personal thing too. It wasn't just another day in Indian country. This was a personal beef between Trump and the Mashpee. But also, when he came into office and you see that he has a photo of Andrew Jackson, and he talks a lot about how natives don't look like natives, so they must not be native. His goal has always been to eradicate indigenous people. And that's been a fear in Indian country since he took office. And we've seen him take these steps to de-establish and challenge our sovereignty. And with the Mashpee, he got very close because they actually did try to say that they were going to de-establish them. And until the court ruled in their favor, it was a fear that we were all seeing this realization that, oh, this is going to happen to the rest of us as well. And there's a reason for it. And because he wants to take land out of trust. And this is where the catch-22 comes in, because once our land goes out of trust and tribes have the right to sell the land to whoever they want to, whether they're native or non-native, that puts some of our tribes in a very precarious situation, because I've always had this idea, because we do have a lot of tribes who are very wealthy and who do support and help fund the Trump campaign and, are just really tight with him. And one of my fears with him taking land out of trust is the fact that he could then use these tribes to buy land from smaller tribes who aren't that financially well off, who, are in dire need of financial help. And once they sell that land to whatever tribe, it kind of opens up this whole new, I guess you would say, a whole new idea, a whole new step in neo-colonization, because then, other tribes could then decide, oh, well, you know what, we bought this land from Standing Rock, so, we're going to give them permission to put a pipeline there. And the people who live there, Standing Rock, would no longer have a say because that land would belong to this other tribe. And I know it sounds so bizarre that any tribe would turn against other Native people or not take into account, their well-being, or that we need to be good relatives to each other. But, we've started to see this in Oklahoma, and I hate to say this because this is my tribe, but with the Ottomazura and the Comanche people, there is a gaming dispute in Oklahoma right now with our gaming compacts. And the Ottomazura and the Comanche kind of fell out of line with the rest of the tribes in Oklahoma to sign their own contracts with the state of Oklahoma. And there's a lot of question in regards to the legality of those compacts. But, it puts all the other tribes in a very precarious situation, because now you're pitting tribe against tribe. And that's a really good way for, the Trump administration to kind of really take power in Indian country, is by playing us against each other, giving us the power to hurt each other. Because whether we like it or not, there are still a lot of tribal feuds that haven't been addressed and are kind of, they come up in a variety of ways. Like, it manifests in different ways, whether it's jokes about each other's nation, or, like going against other tribes, like kind of playing devil's advocate in a way. You're like, oh, well, they're not the good tribe, we are, because we're going to agree with you on this. So there's a lot of worrisome actions being taken right now, but all of it is just steps in this pattern of anti-indigeneity that we see being overplayed throughout American history. You look at last year when they're looking at segregation and assimilation. We have a lot of Native kids who are being stolen from our communities and adopted out to white families, or they make it very difficult for Native families to reclaim their children. And you look back at the residential boarding school, it's the same thing. It's just this pattern and these methods that they're using to try and continue eradicating Native people. It's always going to be deny, justify, rinse, and repeat as needed when it comes to these methods because they work. And, now we've come to this part where a lot of our tribes, whether we want to admit it or not, we have been colonized as well. We've adopted very colonized ways of thinking, the ways that we run our governments even. And it puts us in a very precarious situation because now it's not that we have the US government as our enemy, as our only enemy. We also have ourselves as our enemy too. And, throughout history too, Native people, we can be our own worst enemies. And, the way that we've just been manipulated through the law, through the colonization, through the education system, it makes it very easy for them to kind of take hold and for some of these ideas to take hold, the same way that blood quantum has taken root in our communities, where people see it as a valid way of measuring who is Indian and who isn't Indian enough. But it all goes back to these steps of anti-indigeneity, of just wanting to eradicate Native people and this land grab. And a lot of people don't understand the gravity of what that means to be established. It's not that they're just taking their land. Once you are de-established, once your federal recognition is taken, you are no longer considered Native. Legally, you have no rights. You're going to lose access to the Indian Healthcare Center services. You lose just all of these treaty rights. Those are void as well. It's like we lose so much of our identity, and it's a paper genocide is what it amounts to. We will still be Native. We know we'll be Native even without or with federal recognition. But legally, it leaves us in the situation where we just have no power. We have no land. We have no means to, fight back really as an entity, because we have been de-established. And I'm really grateful that they won this court case, and that the federal judge did make note that the department can no longer act on this. They cannot go back and revisit this and try to do it again. Now, I'm sure that they're trying to find ways to appeal this, and I'm sure they will, because it's something that we're going to fight against time and time and time again in Indian country, is our land being taken and our identities being stolen. That's something that we're always going to fight against. But, now I feel like we do have the means to fight fire with fire, because we have some brilliant legal minds in Indian country and people, organizers who have been just doing a fantastic job at being able to organize, not only their tribes, but also bring in other tribes to act as allies, to, use their court cases as well, to really kind of create an alliance, which is really what we need in Indian country right now. Because we do need to stick together, because that is the only way we're going to continue to survive. And it's the only way that we have survived up till now.
Ladies, I want to move along to South Dakota, because South Dakota is a flashpoint for some things that are happening right now, especially involving the Trump administration. And I feel terrible that we spend so much time addressing how Indian country has to continually fight the Trump administration, but unfortunately that's the reality. So a couple of things. First of all, Donald Trump is planning to visit Mount Rushmore the weekend of 4th of July, which would be next weekend. They're planning a fireworks display and all this, gross pageantry around celebrating the birth of the nation, pun intended. But obviously, this is causing a lot of controversy because the Native Americans are protesting, because that is a sacred site. The mountains, I think, is it called Six Grandfathers, I believe, by the Sioux tribe. And, doing a little bit of research about this, how Mount Rushmore even came to be is wholesale disgusting. I mean, that was land that was agreed to with the U.S. government and the Sioux tribe back in the 1800s, but and treaty to be for them their land forever in perpetuity until there was gold in them dire hills, and then the forcible removal of Native Americans came from off of that, and then the guy who was the architect and the sculptor for Mount Rushmore, same racist piece of crap who designed the Stone Mountain Confederate Memorial in Georgia, outside of Atlanta. So yeah, it's white supremacy all around, enough to go swimming in. And of course, Donald Trump wants to exacerbate that and drive that point home by appearing at Mount Rushmore on the 4th of July. But in addition to that, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe is also suing the Trump administration over their COVID highway checkpoints, which the tribes argue were successful in keeping the rates of COVID down in their tribal areas. And they have named a bunch of people as defendants as part of this lawsuit, including Donald Trump's chief of staff, former Congressman Mark Meadows, and Dr. Doris Burks of the White House coronavirus task force fame. I don't remember which one of you guys pitched this story, but whoever did, I'd love for you to lead off the conversation and weigh in on it, because it seems as though the Sioux seem to always be fighting somebody, especially when it comes to the government, whether or not it's Governor Kristi Noem of North Dakota or South Dakota, pardon me, or whether or not it's oil companies trying to run pipelines through their lands. Just a fight on so many fronts for Native Americans in that part of the country. Constant fight.
Well, yeah, and it's devastating to think that, COVID is hitting Native communities so hard, and the government has set aside money specifically for Indian country. And for the Cheyenne River, the reason that they are suing is because that money is being held until they remove the checkpoints. That is the whole point of contention. And it's kind of funny because the Governor Noem actually went and met with Donald Trump. And, she's been really trying to appeal to him to get the tribe to remove the checkpoints. Because it's, she just wants to reopen up. She has no regards for anybody's health or safety in her state. And, with the tribes, she's really hitting them hard on this checkpoint. And she's even lying about the impact that these checkpoints are having. She's saying that they're blocking commercial traffic, that they're not letting anybody through, but that's not true. They're checking and making sure that the people who are going through have a legitimate reason to be crossing that land, because it eliminates the risk to their people of contacting COVID-19. And with this lawsuit, they're suing because their people need that money right now. They need to be able to provide for their people. And this money is set aside specifically for Native tribes to be able to do so. And for them to kind of hold it up because of a checkpoint is very reprehensible right now, because they are literally risking the lives of the people of the Cheyenne River. And, it goes back to, we talked about this in the first episode that we did about the checkpoints and how they've been helping Native communities combat COVID-19. The Navajo people are still doing checkpoints. Other tribal nations are starting to do checkpoints as well, because we are getting hit so hard with COVID. And we need to be able to have the means to protect our people, to take care of them, to have the resources that we need. And, with this lawsuit, it's just ridiculous that this is what we have to do in order to just reclaim just a little bit of the help that they have promised us. Like, we have to fight tooth and nail for it. They make us jump through so many hoops. And when you really look at the scope of it, the money that our tribes are receiving is not even close to what we need to really be able to take care of our people. And it's just so reprehensible that we have to fight so hard for just a little bit, for just a tiny bit of help, or just to have them, stand by the promises and the treaties that they have made with us. Like, we shouldn't have to fight. Like, this is something that, they should just be doing because it is their duty to do.
Desiree, your thoughts on the tribes, flexing their autonomy for a justifiable reason in the midst of a pandemic, trying to ensure that their members are kept safe from outsiders bringing this virus into spread in an already vulnerable place. But again, the federal government responding in retaliation, as Jen mentioned, not only holding up the funds, and mind you, the Trump administration is being sued by a handful of tribes in regards to the disbursement of the funds designated for Indian country in the CARES Act to the tune of $8 billion. The Shawnee just filed a suit against the Trump administration saying that they were undercounted and therefore they're not getting their fair share of the money. But it seems as though Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Department, and Donald Trump at large, they just find any reason to hold this money up to increase delays for dispersing the money as it is desperately needed in these communities.
Yeah, I wish for all tribes to have leadership like Harold Frazier, the chairman of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. I recall when we were all in Standing Rock that he was also a very powerful leader in advising around the tribal sovereignty of Standing Rock. And it's because the Oceti Nation is extremely powerfully organized. So when you say it seems like the Lakotas are always in a fight with somebody, it's because they're organized as a nation with their many bands. And they're powerful in that way. So I really love it when I hear about Chairman Frazier's out there just holding it down for his people, because when you look at even before Trump, Chairman Frazier was strong with Obama when, at Standing Rock, he waited for us to bleed too. So this is not like specific to Trump, these like land grabs. I think Kristi Noem is gross and embarrassing as a woman. She's like just racist and terrible. The power dispute is actually what's going on, because North Dakota, they did not care that they were blocking the highway to block off the camp going to Standing Rock when it was under their control. But now here it is, it's in a Native Nations control within their treaty territory. They don't like it because federal highways and things like that are still within the jurisdiction of the state. So that's why those kinds of disputes are happening. And I think that if you look at what's going on in the region more broadly, the Keystone XL pipeline construction is still a thing to be concerned with. And so there's a lot of motivation to keep the roads open, and maintain that sense of control, because they're going to try and push through the Keystone XL mainline alternative route.
Johnnie, to remain in court so much, behind getting what is owed to you, what is not only to say what is owed is actually that does the whole thing a disservice, because you can never pay what is owed to Native Americans. But at the same time, the amount that has been allotted in the CARES Act, I did mention the Shawnee, and this is what I found was interesting, because as I understand it, the money is to be divided up by tribes based on population, based on member numbers, based on the amount of people who are official members of a given nation. But how the government was dispersing the money was based upon whether or not people were actually living within tribal areas. And the Shawnee challenge that they have more members who live away from the tribal lands, therefore their numbers were undercounted, therefore their cut of the CARES Act was not what it should be. And the Treasury Department, in the interest of playing games, I imagine, with Indian country, is even now trying to hold up the rest of the money that they owe because of this dispute. What's your take on the nuances of why the CARES Act is failing to get to the hands where it is most needed in Indian country?
Mainly because it's purposeful. It's not an accident that they're withholding these funds, that at this time during a pandemic that they're making cuts to IHS services as well. The fact that IHS is underfunded, that is intentful. The same with withholding money and, making sure that, I guess you would say underfunding tribes that do qualify because, the government knows as well as we do that a majority of natives do not live in their communities. We're spread out across the US. I believe it's something like anywhere from 70 to 80% of the native population do not reside on reservations. And so it's very purposeful for them to say, oh, well, we're only going to help natives from this tribe and count the natives who live within this community. And a lot of that is because they're the ones that are counted. And, there's a lot of dispute within Indian country about that as well, about the rights that you have as a native living away from your own community, because it is a fight to have voting rights, even as a citizen, and to have access to voting for tribal matters if you do not reside within your own community. And also with the numbers, we have a lot of natives, because of blood quantum, who can't qualify for citizenship within their tribes, because of the way that blood quantum has been designed to reduce, I guess you would say, our measure of nativeness with every generation. So that was also intentful. And it all goes back to them and the whole purpose and the goal of the United States to eradicate indigenous people. It's not an accident. It's not a overstep or misstep. It's something that they are purposely doing in order to strike at Native communities during this time. And it's something that we deal with even when there's not a pandemic. We are always underfunded. They never live up to the treaty rights. We're always having to go into court, which, it also takes a financial toll on our tribes because we do have to pay for our lawyers. And we have to pay to keep fighting. So when people look at how impoverished Native communities are, a huge part of that is because we constantly have to be going to court and fighting tooth and nail and appealing and having to appeal again and to have to, go to court for another issue as well. But all of that it's intentful, it's purposeful, and it is meant to strike and hurt Native communities. And all of that is, just so reprehensible because, I know right now we don't have leadership, but I think with the way that we have to choose between the lesser of two evils always when it comes to the government and who we vote for, I think we're at that point in time when, these politicians should know better, when they should be thinking, oh, we need to make sure that we are fulfilling the promises to the indigenous people, to the people whose land we reside on. And especially now during a pandemic, it's just, I don't even have the words anymore for just how evil it is.
And it's constant. That's the kicker. It's like, don't y'all get tired? Like, don't you have something else don't you want to go to space? Colonialists, like, can you leave the people of color, just leave them be for like a year or two if it's not too much trouble? Before we sign off, I did want to read some comments from the comments because people were chiming in big time. MD says, land is everything. It's the most important statement ever. Land is life. Also from the comments, 206, War Eagle, we missed you. He said, they said, I care more about saving native languages than I do about saving financial institutions. Co-sign there. Also, Anthony Mann says, give the lands promised in treaties. Yep. Friendly sentiments from the comments for today's Stir Crazy for First Nation Fridays. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel for joining us again. Journalist and community activist, community builder, Johnnie Jae, Miwok journalist and community organizer, Desiree Kane, and the founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism, along with being a journalist and organizer, Jen Deerinwater. Follow all these ladies on Twitter. And ladies, I appreciate your time and thank y'all for joining us again for another First Nation Fridays. Great conversation.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Wado.
And I always learn so much. So when Johnny brought up blood quantum again, that's when Desiree taught us about blood quantum last episode. So see, you learn things. You need to come back and join us again on First Nation Fridays. Gang, again, don't forget, the coronavirus is still out here jumping on people. It is jumping on people. So don't think it's a game. Don't think that it's over. Don't think that the coronavirus needs to chill. No, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay away from large crowds unless you're protesting. But we all saw that the protests are not driving up the COVID rates. So because people are wearing the mask and using hand sanitizer. So again, the Rona is still out there. Just keep that in mind. Have a great weekend. And we'll see y'all on Tuesday on First Stir Crazy. See ya. See you later. Bye.